Welcome to Labor Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Abrantes, Assistant Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, the Carpenters Union.
And I'm Cyndie Williams, Executive Director of the CCT. Together as your co-hosts, we'll explore the world of organized labor, bringing you behind-the-scenes stories and insights from inspiring union leaders, dedicated partners, and community change makers. In each episode, we dive into authentic conversation to uncover what unions are really about beyond the headlines and the myths.
Whether you're new to the movement or a union ally, our conversation, showcasing diverse voices and real-life stories, will explore union hurdles, triumphs, labor's rich history, its role in workforce development, all while shedding light on how unions create lasting change and foster economic growth and creating generational wealth.
Join us as we build a broader coalition, elevate future generations, and showcase how unions contribute to creating a positive cultural legacy.
Tune in, get informed, and find out how organized labor is making a difference. Todd, good morning. Thanks for being here. Happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, guys. Happy to be here.
Twice in 1 week, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
We're on a roll.
Today, we're joined by Todd Vachon, a union carpenter, faculty member of the Department of Labor Studies, Employment Relations at Rutgers University, and Director of Labor Education Action Research Network, LEARN. As the Director of LEARN, Todd oversees the university's labor education programs, including classes, research, and workshops for workers, unions, and other justice-focused organizations. His research focuses on inequality in labor, justice. He has written several books and currently president of New Brunswick chapter of Rutgers Faculty Union, AAUP-AFT. He is also the president of the Middlesex-Somerset Central Labor Council and vice president of Higher Education of AFT New Jersey.
A lot of hats.
And just recently elected to
Yes.
the AFL-CIO president,
Yeah.
which I think Cyndie participated
Yes,
in.
it was an honor that we were there to
Yeah,
honor
thank you for
last
coming
week.
out. Always great to have carpenter sisters and brothers in the room.
Absolutely, and it's such great work to do with the CLC, so it's great to be a part of that
important
organization.
work, yeah.
So tell us about your role at Rutgers Learn Center and build out for us the premise behind that program.
Sure. So I currently serve as the director of LEARN. So LEARN is our labor education division. So there's a School of Management and Labor Relations if you wanted to come pursue a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or even a PhD in labor relations. That's the degree granting part of the school. And then what I am in charge of is what's known as the extension work, which actually predates the degree granting part of the school. So the labor education division was created, get this, in 1947 by an act of the New Jersey State Legislature. What was happening in 1947 in the United States? Come on, U.S. history. What was going on in 1947?
Is it Taft-Hartley?
You tell us.
All right, World War II just ended, right?
And everybody was coming back.
World War II.
So there was massive labor unrest. There were more strikes in those 2 or 3 years after World War II than there were any other point in history in terms of work stoppages, number of workers out, days on strike. So a lot of states like New Jersey, New York, a few others created these labor education centers and labor education programs as a way to create labor peace, to educate management and labor on the benefits of having a functioning labor relations system based on collective bargaining, having grievance handling processes, conflict resolution mechanisms in place. So that's really the origin of the program at Rutgers. So we started out as a labor education program, and then we began to add on the degree granting part many years later. So we've been doing it for 76 years now? Oh, yeah, over 75 years. And some of the programs have been running consecutively every year since then. Of course, a lot of it has changed over time as industries have changed and the labor movement has changed and the country has changed. But we're really fortunate to have this in New Jersey. There's only a handful of states that have these at this point. There were many more programs, decades ago, but between, budget cuts, right-wing attacks on labor and trying to eliminate these sort of programs that help workers empower themselves and organize and fight for rights, have really seen an erosion of labor centers. So we're fortunate to still have one in New Jersey, and I think that reflects us. We're a strong labor state, right? We have the support of the unions in the state, and we got the back of the unions with education, and they've got the back of the Labor Education Center to make sure that we're here to continue to serve the labor movement so that working people can have a voice.
I think to your point, it is a reflection of the state that we live in. We are fortunate. But I would say, you said it started in 1947. I would say even it's more important now that we have these educational programs available, because some of those challenges that we thought existed back then are really still prevalent today, just in a different form, not as visible, right, or not as divisive. But the reality is nothing has changed. So I think it's more important than ever to actually educate folks, not just on the labor side, but I think showcasing the value between a good partnership between labor and management is extremely important. And we've seen some success around the world in other countries where they do embrace that labor management partnership. And while we live in a capitalist economy here, where we tend to sacrifice is on labor. Right? We never sacrifice profits, but we do sacrifice the working people that help us drive up those profits. So with that said, I guess, how does the program itself address, social, legal aspects of unions and labor organizing, and tying that into what we just discussed?
Sure. So we offer a number of certificate programs. The three certificates in particular we have. One is a labor and employment law certificate. So that really is a deep dive into all of the basics of labor and employment law. We have a public sector labor relations certificate because, of course, as your viewers might know, public sector workers are governed under a different set of rules. The private sector is governed federally under the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed in 1935. So that's the same law from 1935, still applying to a very different economy today. But public sector workers didn't really get the right to organize till many decades later. President Kennedy passed an executive order in 1961 to give federal workers the right to organize. And then individual states began to do so thereafter. Wisconsin, believe it or not, of all states, was the first one to have public sector labor relations. And of course, that's, as we know from 2011, the state where Scott Walker attacked and pulled back many of those rights. But really, it was in the 1970s the public sector started to get, mostly in the northern states we now see as blue states, labor strongholds have more favorable public sector labor laws. And many of the southern states, it's forbidden for public sector workers to negotiate, or only certain groups of workers can, perhaps only firefighters and police, or perhaps only teachers, but not across the board like we can here in New Jersey. So the public sector certificate deals with all of the issues around, like you said, organizing and law for public sector workers. The regular labor and employment law certificate does that for all workers and focuses largely on the private sector. And then we have a negotiation, arbitration, and conflict resolution certificate, which deals with all of the aspects of that, right? It's collective bargaining, it's negotiating skills, it's different ways to resolve conflicts both between management and labor, but also within the workplace. As we all work in labor. We know sometimes the most difficult challenges are members disagreeing with members, right? Within, there's strife sometimes between the two sides, but then there's strife within the house on the labor side and also on the management side, right? So how do we deal with that to ensure that as a union we're unified and we have that solidarity to step to the bargaining table and win those demands that are going to help our members? And
I've been through some of those the majority of your certificate programs there. And I think the one that was most interesting is, and I forget which class it was, maybe the conflict resolution one, where you had like a mock scenario of management negotiating with labor on certain terms and conditions, and having some labor folks sit on the other side and be the management. That was quite the scenario, right? Putting them in that position to try to make those decisions and push back on their colleagues on what they wanted.
That's how we do it. It's popular education. So labor education, for folks who've never taken a class like this before, should understand it's not like sitting in a college classroom where you're getting lectured at from the podium. It's very hands-on. It's very practical. A lot of times the students are just fellow union members, and we're learning as much from each other as we are from the professor at the front of the room, right? People bring their real-world experiences in, and we workshop them, right? Like when we're going to practice filing a grievance, what industry do you work in? What's a typical type of grievance? Let's create a scenario where we actually work on something that's likely to happen in your workplace. And the bargaining is a lot of fun. Like you said, when you give labor folks the opportunity to play the role of management, they have a lot of fun with it, right? Because they know the type of stuff that management can do. And sometimes labor people as managers can come up with the most evil, awful things you can imagine.
Sure. Yeah, and I, thinking back, I received my bachelor's degree through the labor studies program at Rutgers.
Excellent.
And just thinking back, I was already a union member at the time, but really didn't have the deep, rich history of union values. Just the history classes alone were something significant in my own career, just to build that relationship with the union movement. And, it took me on studies to Guatemala, and I did an independent study there in maquillas and sweatshops, and it was really an intense experience. But I really feel that giving those labor education courses not only to union members, but just to labor history courses for the general public to learn, you really get a deeper understanding of why the union movement matters and just labor in general and what significance it brings to communities at large.
Probably even more important to folks that aren't even part of the labor movement, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Building that broader coalition of folks that don't necessarily understand what our day-to-day responsibilities are and what we're trying to change. Like, yes, we represent our members, our constituents, but when we represent them and we make those changes for them, it actually changes the conditions for everybody in the industry. I think that's what people tend to take for granted. The most simple things, right? The 39 facts, right? The 39 facts, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Of what folks, whether they were part of the union at the time or weren't part, sacrificed for what we all fail to appreciate now, whether you're a blue-collar worker or a white-collar worker. Nobody knows how we got what we got.
Yes.
It wasn't just given to us.
Right.
Somebody put their life on the line or sacrificed. So I think, to your point, I think educating young folks, whether they're in high school or college, about just labor in general is extremely beneficial to society as a whole.
I absolutely agree, and I think we really dropped the ball on that at the high school level. But for folks that come to Rutgers, I haven't confirmed this, but I have a really good sense that I think more people graduate Rutgers with a labor history class than any other university probably in the world. There's a couple of interesting reasons for that. We offer a ton of sections of it. It meets a gen ed requirement for undergrads, and they're all trying to get those gen ed classes their freshman and sophomore year. So we have students majoring in finance, engineering, pharmaceuticals. You can have a class with 75 students doing labor history, and only 2 or 3 of them are actually majoring in labor studies. The rest are from all of these other disciplines, but they're learning the history of the AFL, the history of the CIO, the National Labor Relations Act. They're learning about Eugene Debs and Mother Jones, and getting just the whole from the beginning to now of why and how and what the labor movement has done for working people in America. So
we thank you for that, because it helps us when we're having those deeper conversations in community.
Yeah.
To have even somebody who's landed in finance to have that understanding of why this all matters.
Yeah,
So
you're quelling the adversaries, proactively when instead in building, advocates is what we're looking for, regardless of what industry they go in.
Yeah.
You don't want them having that mindset, especially like it's the finance industry. Oh, like we're going to hold working people back.
Yeah.
When you went to a class that talked about the sacrifice they made for maybe some of the things that you as a finance major now will reap the benefits of, right?
That's right.
So that's extremely important.
Yeah.
Sure.
One other thing that I always like to mention, in addition to teaching labor history, I have to say, over the past 10, 15 years, the organizing of graduate student employees also has a very similar effect, because you have workers that are graduate workers at the university in all of these different disciplines that have never thought about or heard about unions, right? Or they think they're just for blue-collar jobs. They have the experience of having a union while they're in graduate school, and then they go on to whatever profession or occupation afterwards, and then they don't have a union. And they start looking around saying, we need a union here, because I'm used to having all these benefits, and now I don't have them anymore.
Absolutely. So in that, all of the folks that have come through the program, some alumni that you can think of, can you tie back any success stories that you know of now that went through the program that are making significant changes in the union world?
There's lots of them. There's one sitting right here. The 2 sitting right here.
Yeah.
Other folks, maybe some folks Barry Kushner from IFPTE, Local 194 Turnpike Workers, right? So he became the president of that local and the president of the Hudson Central Labor Council, the graduate of our program. I was just doing a training down in Baltimore with IATSE, the Hollywood Workers, right? International Association of Theatrical Stage Employees. And it's all their national staff and national reps. And one of our graduates there is now in one of the top positions in their National Education and Training Department. So doing labor education for that union at the national level. And she's somebody who came through our program and got an internship with IATSE and has really made a significant impact in that industry. And it's wonderful. There's many every year that go on, and it's nice to see where people end up.
Sure. That's great.
Yep.
That's really great.
So currently in your role at AFT, what are some of the key issues that you're dealing with, and I guess how do they impact, the day-to-day stuff that's really happening, on campus?
Yeah. So AFT New Jersey, we represent both K to 12 public education workers, not only teachers, but bus drivers and administrative staff at schools, as well as higher education, so all of the universities, professors, and also administrative staff. What are the issues we face? I think similar across both of those. One of our things that we always like to say is students' learning conditions are our working conditions, and that applies both in the K-12 and the university level. So that could be anything from literally working conditions like the quality of the buildings, the airflow, the heating, the cooling, right? Those actual health and safety working conditions, onto things like classroom size, right? The number of students in a class is going to impact the workload of the instructor, but it's also going to impact the educational experience of the students.
Yep.
Right? So what does this all tie back to? It's always fighting over budgets, making sure we're properly funding education at all levels, right? Public education has been under attack for ever and ever and ever by the same forces that are attacking labor in general. We have a teacher shortage, and part of the reason we have a teacher shortage is people are weighing their career options and looking at the pay and the benefits and the stress level of this particular job. And schools are funded largely by local taxes, so more affluent towns have better resources. So it just reinforces the disparities of educational opportunities along the lines of social class, just depending on where you're born, right, as a kid. So we're always fighting for those sort of things, like increasing funding for schools, equalizing funding across schools, keeping class sizes low, keeping tuition down for students. We were on strike at Rutgers over a number of issues, but one of the big things that's happening in higher ed over the past several decades is this adjunctification of the occupation, right? Yep. So a smaller and smaller percent of faculty are actually full-time permanent employees. Adjuncts are temporarily employed, hired to teach 1 or 2 classes a semester with no guarantee of job security, no health insurance, at much lower pay rates. Yep. So they've slowly, through attrition, not replacing full-time faculty, but hiring a greater and greater percentage of this flexible workforce. And these are folks who went to college for 8 years to get a PhD and are utmost experts in their discipline, and they're teaching the same classes that the tenured full-time faculty are, but they're being paid a fraction of the cost. And so that's something we're always fighting against and finding ways to improve those issues. So one of the things we won on strike was to have longer job appointments for those folks, and after they're here for a number of years, have an even longer contract. Yep. We won what we called, we couldn't get tenure. We were fighting for what we called teaching tenure, but we were able to get presumptively renewable contracts, which means at the end of say you're on a 4-year contract, instead of having to reapply and rehire, it's presumed that it gets renewed unless there's just cause to let you off. So it's essentially like having a tenure protection. It means your job is your job unless there's cause for you to be let go. So we're always battling back and forth on those kind of issues to make the bad jobs into good jobs. What labor does in every industry and occupation, right? We want to make jobs good jobs. We want them to be family-sustaining jobs with health benefits.
And it's funny because that's almost like internal outsourcing, right? Let's find a means to circumvent paying good wages, good benefits for the folks that are tenured, and find an alternative. And what happens in many cases, because you're affecting 2 livelihoods, right? And we're affecting your livelihood versus the adjunct professor's livelihood, and you kind of pit people against one another.
That's right.
Right? Strategic. Now, you might not, if you can't see through that, you wouldn't know it. But I know you also have, unions that represent the adjuncts, right? So you're bringing alignment to the mission at some of these universities when it comes to education.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that that movement is progressing, because that's always concerning when you start pitting workers against one another.
Yeah.
Because then people start only looking at their own interests versus the interests of the community or the institution, or what's in benefit of all of them.
That's the age-old tactic, divide and conquer. Yep. How is it that a small number of people control the masses? You keep the masses divided up and fighting each other, whether it's race, religion, gender, your job.
They get distracted by what's really happening.
Some reason that you can break up the people into subgroups where they're pointing fingers at each other instead of looking where the real power is, which is above them.
Yeah. And one of the most important things, and we talked about this on several of the shows, was the importance of education and having an educated electorate. And I think what you guys are doing in terms of labor studies, just in education in general, when you educate folks, you empower them. Right. And when you empower them, you change the way they think, related to policies or their voting habits. And in many cases, we live in a society where we really don't necessarily want to empower people for certain reasons. But it's up to folks like us and educators like yourself to make sure that we continue to educate that next generation so that they could be good advocates for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That said, just listening to our audience, our listeners in our audience are broad, not necessarily folks that are union subscribed. What are some of the larger understandings of what a union can provide, and why would we want to all become union allies, whether we belong to a union or not?
Right. So kind of the values, yeah.
Correct.
I think it's a number of things, right? I think what unions really provide is kind of a instructional ground for democracy. I think they're an essential piece of a democratic society. And any capitalist society, as soon as you have capitalism, you have unions, right? And when you see democracy eroding, what's the first group that gets attacked? Unions, right? So, I mean, it's an integral part to having a democratic society. It creates, a collective will of the working people, right? The majority of people work for a living. It also creates a place to exercise and practice democracy. We have constitutional protections under the U.S. Constitution, but when you step into your job, you basically check those rights at the door, because the boss can dictate what you can and cannot wear. You can be fired for any reason unless you have a union, right? So what a union does is it starts to insert democracy into this otherwise authoritarian sphere of life where working people spend most of their waking hours, which is their job, right? So democracy, I would say, is value number one. Fairness, obviously, like that's at the core of what we fight for, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. What does it mean to work 40 hours a week and I still can't pay my rent? It means there's something not fair happening here because the owner has 3 mansions and a yacht, right? So, democracy, fairness, and of course, solidarity. Because the only way we can achieve fairness is to come together, right? As individual workers, we really don't have any power to approach the boss. We can beg for a raise, but it's up to the boss to give us a raise or not. And at the end of the day, they can easily fire one individual worker and replace you unless you have some really unique set of skills that's highly sought after. But for most people, it's a lot easier for the boss to fire you and replace you than it is for you to leave your job and find another job that pays as well. But through solidarity, that changes the whole dynamic, right? It addresses that imbalance because now as a whole workforce, you can threaten the withdrawal of your labor, and that makes the boss have to actually sit down and talk to you. And that's where you can begin to negotiate and have some parity, at least, not necessarily equality, but at least greater equality than exists between the individual worker and the boss. And I think the other thing that unions do, so they address that imbalance, but they also address the political imbalance in our society, right? The economy is not just like a force of nature. The economy is political, right? We pass laws to regulate things or not regulate things. Those are choices that have outcomes that benefit one group or another. So groups that are organized are going to fight for the laws that benefit them. Businesses want to cut regulations so they can have more profits. Workers want to raise minimum wages so that we can have more money to feed our families, right? So the economy is political, right? That's point number one. Point number two is we have such inequality in our society that the billionaires can throw endless money at politics. Individual workers can't do that. Unions can't even do that. Like one Koch brother spent more money on the last presidential election than the entire labor movement combined, right? We can't win the money battle, right? It's just, it doesn't add up. But what we do have is people power, right? The way you beat organized
Collective
money
voice.
is organized people. So labor does a great job of bringing together working people around issues legislatively and around candidates to support those issues. Union members vote at a higher rate. They're more likely to engage and get out the vote efforts and canvass and knock on doors and get fellow workers to vote. And that's really the kind of the counterbalance we bring to the table, which again is why certain right-wing forces want to eliminate labor, right? It's the fact that we create that counterbalance to their power.
Yeah, we are the only thing that can combat that force of resources through human capital.
That's right.
But I think it's becoming more and more challenging because in the society we live in today, everything is about what's in it for me, right? How do I get a leg up? When in reality, when our ancestors came here, or even when immigrants are still coming to this country, people need to coalesce to maintain power, to build power. And I think we're getting further and further away from that. And at the end of the day, it goes back to education, right? Our culture, our community, our family. How do we sustain something like that? That's not just in the best interest of me or my family, but my community as a whole and society as a whole. And I'm not necessarily saying we want to take capitalism out of America, right? Because that is the American opportunity that creates a lot of what we have. but it's doing things the right way and being profitable in a way that is acknowledging the hard work of people and not sacrificing what they do. Because at the end of the day, we all know this, like the more money we make, the more money we put back into the system, right? And everybody benefits from that.
Right.
If we have this system of inequality and we only have very wealthy people, very poor people, at the end of the day, that's not a sustainable system, and that doesn't really benefit anybody.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, listen, it's great to be a millionaire, but if I took a millionaire and what they contribute to a society, or I took 10 people that made $100,000, who's going to contribute more to society? The 10 people making $100,000, right? They're going to try to buy a home. They're going to buy cars. They're going to send their kids to school. They're going to put food on the table. They're going to pay taxes. You know, they're buying multiple pillows for their house, not one pillow for the wealthy person. You know, so it's an economic stimulator, and I think we take for granted, particularly I think corporate America takes for granted, how important it is for people to make more money, to have a sustainable living, to have the ability to retire with dignity if possible, and to have health care, right? The challenges that brings to the table. And I don't necessarily always think we need to sacrifice one for the other, but I think we need to bring balance to that, and the only way to do that is through people.
Yes, that's right. I mean, you mentioned before, you look at in the European context, right? There are many other countries that are capitalists that have done it in a much different way. There's all kinds of varieties of capitalism, right? So it's not just one flavor. We happen to have the particularly brutal flavor of it here in the U.S. that, like you said, wants to sacrifice workers for the bottom line most of the time.
For sure.
But you look at like the Scandinavian countries, you know, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Norway, they're always like the happiest. On the happiness meter, they're always the happiest people in the world.
Sure.
They're capitalist countries just like us. There's millionaires there, right? But the difference is that working people are valued, and they have great health benefits and great pay and time off and paid time off and maternity and paternity leave like you wouldn't believe, right? So they have true family values, right? Putting the majority first.
Sure.
Yeah.
And even when you think about those countries too, their mass transit system is incredible because they have this collective value of transportation, whereas we all value our own individual cars. Or it's that individualist society that is hard to break for us, right? So it's a difficult thing to collectively bring people together for that type of cause when, you know, we have our own generated interests.
Yeah.
But, you know, that said, going back...
we're taught from a very early age, right?
Oh, yeah.
Very individualistic
Absolutely.
kind of society.
Sure. And you see that fracture when you're trying to keep people together for the common cause.
Yeah.
That said, you know, going back to your student body, do you involve them at all in some of these issues that you're trying to tackle outside of the university or even inside of the university, just to collectively have some sort of... mission, if you will, for them to focus on or center on?
Yeah, I mean, I can say when we went on strike, the students were some of the biggest supporters on our picket lines, right? The students were really active and engaged and understood. When a lot of them learned, like, wait a minute, you're my professor and you're an adjunct, you don't have a full-time job here. Like, most students didn't realize that. They presume their professor is a pretty affluent, well-to-do person. He's a professor. She's a professor. Dr. So-and-so, right? Sure. And to find out that, like, this professor is making... probably the same as the person working at Starbucks, right? But with less job security. Like, that's kind of an outrage to them. So, you know, bringing them in and educating them on those issues. So definitely there. But through our labor studies program, we always try and find ways to plug our students into work. Like you talked about your opportunity you had. So we create internship opportunities for folks. The neat thing about having the Labor Education Center is students come there to take undergraduate classes, but at the same time, unions are using the space too and doing workshops and trainings or having elections and things like that. So they're coming into the same building together and kind of bumping into each other.
Yeah.
You've got a particular union using the auditorium right now, and then right next to it is a class on collective bargaining for bachelor degree students. And, it's cool. It's cool to kind of bring those two worlds together.
Well, it's important. And we had Reverend Pastor Francois on one of our shows, talking about the intersectionality between the civil rights movement and the labor movement, right? Which if we go far enough back, we'll see that they intersected and they worked hand in hand. But if you were to talk to folks today, even on the labor movement side or the civil rights side, they wouldn't even acknowledge that even happened, if they even knew it happened, right? So I think putting people in the same room, having those conversations and seeing how they share so many things in common and how we can work together collectively to empower folks, regardless of where you came from or what you look like, I think is extremely powerful. And I think putting labor folks in a building with young students young students have no idea what these folks do as labor leaders, and giving them that ability to educate one another and feed off of each other, right? Because our issues are different, but the challenges in society are the same, right? It's just how we get there, achieve them, is a different path that we all take. So I think that's extremely important to what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
We have a great display, and by the way, if you come by the Labor Center, we have a great historical display in the lobby with some old photos. And one of my favorite ones, just to your point on civil rights, is when Dr. Martin Luther King was in the Labor Education Center at Rutgers University. And just to show you that, and Walter Reuther, and just to think about that intersection happening right here in New Jersey, and the important, difficult discussions that were being had at that time, right here,
Sure.
Yep.
And I had the honor of being able to be toured, so thanks for that.
Oh, yeah.
Probably about a
Lots
year
of fun.
ago, I
Yeah.
was able to go visit the center, and you could see all the pictures on the wall, the history, and even that collective space where unions are able to utilize that
With all the
space
banners
is really
around it,
great.
yeah.
All the banners that are flanking the room.
That's our chapel.
That's great. That's great. The Union Chapel.
Yep.
What trends do you see shaping the labor education process in the coming years?
Yeah, good question. I think across all of labor, one of the biggest issues we're always facing is technological change, right? So considering, how are things like AI and automation going to impact workplaces? So we got to consider how can we help educate unions and workers to confront these new emerging issues and changing technologies, right? And we saw the ILA was just on strike over automation, right? And I can say as a faculty member, my colleagues, many are really concerned about the use of AI by, students in grading and trying to determine what is and isn't actual research and writing by the student versus using AI to write an essay for their exam. So it's impacts all different types of work from blue collar to white collar. So those issues, technological issues, are definitely going to shape what kinds of offerings we need to develop going forward. Another piece that's really important to me that I've been saying for a long time is we can't just be speaking to the already organized. We can't just be doing labor ed for union members, right? When this program was created in 1947, it was about 35% of private sector workers had a union. How many today? Do you guys
7 if we're lucky.
Yeah, it's just under 7.
Yeah.
So it's a shrunken percentage. If we don't figure out ways to bring more people into the labor movement and organize more workers, then what is the purpose of labor education, right? We're going to be teaching to fewer and fewer people until both the labor movement's gone and labor education's gone, right? And if the mission of this program, as it was stated in the statute of the state of New Jersey, is to educate management and labor on the benefits of having an industrial labor relations system based on collective bargaining, then it seems to me an important part of labor education is helping educate workers that don't have a union how and why they should have a union, so that then they can learn the tools of collective bargaining so that we can then have that functioning labor relations system. So I think a lot of outreach to workers, which we've been doing quite a bit. We've worked with some Amazon drivers and warehouse workers to educate them on their rights and basic organizing skills. We partner a lot with worker centers and immigrant right groups. New Labor is a really great organization in New Brunswick, and they work with a lot of immigrant workers on wage theft issues and understanding your rights there, domestic workers' rights. So yeah, I think it's thinking outside the box to workers, not just workers in unions. That's going to be an important trend going forward if we're all going to survive and turn this boat around and start heading towards equality.
Sure.
And I think also just looking at other sectors and occupations that haven't historically been unionized and looking where new industries are arising, right? We can't just keep thinking about the same old industries. So tech, we see this.
Yeah, I was going to say technology industry.
Video gaming, these kind of emerging industries. AI, I mean, there's probably going to be some jobs related to AI that we can think about. Well, how does that fit into the labor movement? And what does a union even look like?
Yeah.
It may be a totally different structure of union. To the point of the adjuncting of professors, I always think coming out of the carpenters union, out of the building trades, it would make a lot of sense for professors to have a hiring hall, and we negotiate across the industry, right? Rather than at the site of employment like we do with factories, right? If they're going to create a system where they're just hiring piecework, professors to teach a class here and there, we should have a professors union hiring hall where they have their benefits between periods of unemployment. They get unemployment rapidly because it's known they're going to be employed and unemployed regularly and frequently. And just have that sort of mini industrial relation system for gig workers and for adjunct faculty. So thinking outside the box, I think, is going to be an important piece of going forward.
Yeah, two things that I think are important I want to get your perspective on. One, obviously, if we look back innovation, while good, has always been at the sacrificing of jobs, right? Traditionally, we have innovation, we sacrifice jobs. And I think you mentioned AI, and AI is obviously one of those new innovative ways for people to use technology. But at the end of the day, it's going to be hurting particularly white-collar Americans in many cases. And I think to your point, how do we pivot from traditionally blue-collar unions to now maybe possibly representing fewer folks in the white-collar side because of innovation, giving them those protections, when they just don't understand the values of what unions bring to the table, because they weren't educated. And I think, we just need to be mindful that as we progress into the future and we continue to have more and more innovation, that we're going to have less and less jobs associated with that technology. And I don't think people tend to understand that because they embrace technology immediately, like we all do.
Yeah.
But at some point, there was a sacrifice that was made as part of the technology to reduce the number of jobs required to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the downsides to innovation, is that we are impacting predominantly blue collar, but now white collar jobs. And I think it's more important than ever that blue collar and white collar America kind of come together and realize that.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things in education is teaching critical thinking skills, right? So if you're looking at innovation, what is it? The first question you want to ask is, who is innovating and for what reason, right? And you're right. It is largely because who has the money and resources to invest in the research to innovate? It's the capitalist business owners that are finding ways to enhance their profits, right? So innovation itself isn't inherently bad. It's just who's wielding it and who's driving it, right? So if you could picture a less unequal society, a more equal society, where there were resources for people to consider innovation for other reasons, like we want to make the world more environmentally friendly. We want to make the world safer. We want to we want to eliminate these dangerous jobs and create good jobs for people, right? Not just we want to eliminate jobs because it's more profitable, right? So innovation is often finding ways to cut out the highly paid jobs, not finding out ways to cut out the dangerous, dirty jobs, right?
Yeah.
So it's always like the question of who's behind it, who's doing this and why. Those are the critical thinking questions I try to get students to think every time. Whenever you read any piece of news, it's like who and for what?
Yeah. And the challenge with that is because with innovation also came this culture of workers wanting flexibility, right? We want to work at our own schedule. We don't want the structure. And we want to, dictate our own work ethic. We'll take all these freelancing opportunities that are out there, not just, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, but there's so many different sectors now that basically have people as independent contractors, right? Or they're being misclassified as independent contractors. And in many cases, the younger generation wants that flexibility. But what they don't realize is by doing that, you're sacrificing the power that you have, right? By giving away, right?
It's that individualist mentality,
right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, all right, well, I want to, the flexibility to make some extra cash on the side and drive, be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver. But I am impacting folks that every day, that is their permanent job.
Yep.
And it's because we are sacrificing the convenience of flexibility or the path of least resistance, not realizing there's consequences to that. How do we overcome that? Because that's a cultural challenge.
Yeah, that's a serious cultural challenge. It requires that mindset of understanding what the collective good is and how important that is to you in the long run. And like you said, if there's a lot of young workers doing this and picking up a little bit of money here and there, and then you end up doing that for 10 years, and now all of a sudden you're hitting the age where you need health insurance, and you don't have health insurance, right?
You never accumulated anything.
But even, the larger connection to how do we organize, right, on social technologies, social media, et cetera, and reach those said Uber drivers on a more impactful level when we're trying to organize. There's ways to hit and reach these people. We just have to be innovative enough to be able to connect to them.
That's right.
And show them what the value could be of unionizing.
That's right.
Right?
That's actually our very next Union Leadership Academy class starting in February, is new media, technology, and organizing. Just thinking of ways to create your story, tell your narrative, and use social media platforms to advocate and organize.
That is the way. Social media has fractured us, but it could also bring us back together.
That's right. It's a tool. Right, you can use a hammer to build a house, or you can use a hammer to crack somebody's skull. It's like it's in the hand of the holder how you use it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's the new level of leadership that we're looking at, coming forward, is who are those folks that are utilizing these new ways and platforms in social to really connect to the larger, deeper initiatives.
Yeah.
So Todd, how do you balance your role as an educator, a researcher, or an advocate, related to labor, education, and justice, or they intersect?
I mostly don't sleep.
Yeah. It's a lifestyle. So it's a lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all three of those kind of buckets of work, they really overlap and they reinforce and support each other in various ways. I mean, if you think about it, education is going to support advocacy. Research is going to support advocacy. Advocacy can support funding to do research or to provide education. So it's kind of, within a given day, I may be turning the hat this way, a quarter turn.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they're all driving in the same direction, which is empowerment of working people and addressing unjustified inequalities in society. So some of the ways that we can help with advocacy is, our research can inform public policy. Like, here's what data shows if we pass a minimum wage law, here's what's going to happen to a variety of factors. Is it going to uplift working people? Is it going to raise costs for consumers? Is it going to generate more tax revenue? And you start to weigh the costs and balances and find out at the end of the day, well, geez, raising the minimum wage is actually beneficial for everybody.
Yep.
We often go in to provide expert testimony when legislation is being heard in Trenton. So I've been down there a number of times to speak on bills. So that's some of the advocacy work we do. Obviously, the labor ed we talked about. Research, I'm actually just beginning a project now with operating engineers on project labor agreements, kind of looking at the economic benefits that they provide to the broader economy. We did a study on prevailing wages a few years ago, which you may have seen. So yeah, it's it all supports each other. It's a lot of work, but it's all really good work. And sometimes I wish I could clone myself. Did you guys ever see the movie Multiplicity?
Yes.
Yes.
Think about that often.
Yep.
Like the third copy of the copy is a little.
You want to clone yourself, but you better be to control yourself too at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You're here on that state level. Do you reach deeper to some folks on the national level, just doing similar initiatives and effort, across the United States?
Yeah. We definitely go outside the state border quite a bit. I have to say, increasingly since COVID, since people have embraced Zoom, at least in our labor ed classes, we offer online classes now that we get people from states that don't have labor centers. We get people from states where they largely don't have labor movements. It's incredible. We had an Amazon warehouse worker from Kentucky in one of our recent classes. So this is like being able to reach. It's creating accessibility to this kind of education for people who wouldn't otherwise have it. So that's one of the beauties of the technology. Of course, it's a trade-off. Nothing beats in-person education. But when you offer a union leadership class at 6 p.m. on Zoom on a weeknight, rather than at the labor center on a weeknight, where people have to drive in traffic and have to live somewhat near the labor center, you find that it's the difference between 10 people in a class and 35 people in a class. So you're reaching way more people. Yeah. And, we have learned creative ways to
different
use
perspectives, even in some of the communication amongst some of the students, right?
Absolutely. Well, it's great for folks, we have a lot of the folks who are, have been in the trades and they're intergenerational and they grew up in labor households and this is their understanding. And then when they're in a classroom with folks that have not had that, or people from the South, they're kind of shocked to learn, like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
You need to have a union. You never really thought about it.
They took for granted
what they had.
Yep.
And then it goes the other way too, where the other workers are like, you have all of that? What are you complaining about? I don't have anything. So to kind of put the people together in a classroom like that is incredible. And it's a transformative experience for all.
If you could leave one lasting impact or legacy on the labor movement, what would it be?
Well, like we said, we're sitting at 6% private sector union density. My dream would be to turn that boat around and get union density up and just increase the number of workers that are organized, have a voice on the job. I think that requires a massive investment in organizing by unions. It requires a massive educational campaign by labor educators and unions as well to reach those, like we've been talking about this whole episode, those non-union workers that have an individualized mindset to understand the benefits and values of having a union. And then the real hardest lift there is it's going to require, I think, some kind of legislative change to labor law. We saw some nice rulings come out of the NLRB under the Biden administration, but of course that's all going to swing like a pendulum because it's political appointments there. So as the party changes, you see this go back and forth, and then the same cases come up, and then the ruling gets reversed, and then it gets reversed again, and it gets reversed. So just some comprehensive labor reform that really kind of puts back in place what the National Labor Relations Act intended when it was passed in 1935 before the Taft-Hartley amendments, which stripped away many of those protections. If you look at union density over time, right from 1935 to 47, I mean, it went up. And then right after Taft-Hartley, it's been a steady decline ever since then. It's just been do. So a lot of those protected activities are no longer protected. The right to work laws were allowed to happen after Taft-Hartley, so we see those in increasing number of states over the years.
Yep.
For your listeners that don't know, those are laws that require unions to represent all of the workers in the workplace, whether or not they pay dues. And so they can't collect any kind of fee from the individual workers, but they're required to represent them. So it puts a cost burden on unions, and it also creates a free rider problem, because as an individual worker, I can choose to pay for this or not pay for it, and I still get it. Right? Imagine if I could choose to pay taxes or not pay taxes. Like, I know taxes give me schools and roads, but it's up to me whether I want to pay them or not.
Yeah.
That's essentially what right to work laws do.
And it causes dissension amongst the folks that are paying their dues,
Right.
who are reaping the benefits of the same folks that aren't paying their dues.
It divides the people within the union, absolutely within the bargaining unit, which is what it was designed to do. I don't know how many folks know the history of right to work, but it was actually a segregationist law initially.
I don't think they know the history, and I don't think they understand what it means because of how it's the terminology, what we call it, right to work.
Yes.
Right. So everyone feels like it embraces everybody.
Yeah.
When in reality,
who wouldn't want
divides,
the right to work, right? It sounds like a good thing, whereas, in fact,
and I'm glad you brought that up, because I love to tell people that bring up the right to work that don't understand it and think it's a good thing, and then when I explain it to them, and many of them are professionals. So I said, okay, you're an accountant, you're an attorney. I'm like, do you have an association that you belong to? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm part of whatever association. I said, okay. I'm like, do you pay dues to that association? Like, yes, I do, and they're advocates for our issues. I said, okay. So what if I was an accountant or I was an attorney and I joined the association, but I didn't have to pay anything? I said, how would that make you feel? Like, well, that's not fair. I'm like, that's exactly what we're trying to say here.
Yeah.
Right to work is the exact same thing, but because it doesn't impact you, you don't really care that it's impacting these other folks. But in reality, it's a divide and conquer strategy.
It absolutely is.
But a good one on behalf of the adversaries.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, its origin was in the South, in the segregated South, to make it so that white workers wouldn't have to join organizations with black workers and pay dues to the same organization and refer to each other as brother and sister. That was the intent of right to work. It wasn't about individual liberty. It was about maintaining segregation in the South. And that's the origin of it.
Yep.
The guy who invented it wrote a whole article in the Dallas Star newspaper laying it out exactly in those terms.
Well, I mean, that was a long time ago, but we still have folks to this day that use those same strategies and tactics.
Yeah, it's 27, 28 states, I think, at this point, still have those laws.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it was nice to see Michigan reversed it, right? Michigan
I think it was 28, now it's 27.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is why that, like I said before, the political power that workers can build through unions is so important.
And there's a significant tie.
Labor fought to repeal that law, right?
Sure. And there's a significant tie to economic earnings in those right-to-work states, as opposed to non-right-to-work states.
And healthcare and safety.
Yep.
Everything across the board.
And I think, to your point, the more people, if we can swing back from 6% to 10% to 15%, and as people coalesce and we build power, we don't necessarily have to worry about this political swing of, Republican versus Democrat, because when you have that power, right, and you control voting habits and policy, you don't always have to worry about, well, if someone is the new elected leader and they change an administration, how impactful is that going to be to the working class people? It's less likely to happen because of power.
Yeah.
So hopefully, one day we can get back to that.
Yeah. Well, just maybe a final point to that comment you just made. The Labor Center, the Labor Education Program, was created bipartisan in 1947. Our building is named after Lewis Herman, who was a Republican, right? So you think about that. If you have 35% of the private sector workforce organized, both political parties are going to be wanting to cater to this very powerful constituency, right? It's no longer a partisan issue. It's a worker issue, which goes across party lines.
Yep. Well, we appreciate you taking the time. You've enlightened me, definitely. Personally.
Yeah, appreciate you coming out. And again, the deeper meaning is to educate the folks that aren't in this community of union organizing, and just to be able to branch out and educate it. Everyone is so important.
And thank you for the great work you're doing for not only for us in the labor movement, for the future generations that are in education.
Thank you. And thank you guys for all the great work you're doing. And congratulations on this podcast, because this is an important part of that education process. So, been a pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Todd.